My mathematician was Hypatia of Alexandria. Before we start, I'd like to note two things. A, if you see any snazzy new pictures, they're from the 2009 film Agora, which was essentially a pretty accurate retelling of her life. And B, I accidentally did way too much research and I wasn't sure how much to cut, so I'm just gonna go pretty fast to avoid boring you out of your minds. Let's get into it. Hypatia, born in around 360 AD, was the daughter of Theon, a pretty famous Greek scholar and mathematician. She lived in Alexandria, Egypt with her father, and would later in life move to the Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantine Empire. Growing up, she took a liking to not only mathematics, but philosophy and astronomy, both of which she became a professor of at the Neoplatonic School of Alexandria. Hypatia was a Neoplatonist. Neoplatonism is a philosophy formulated by Plotinus in around 3rd century AD. It's difficult to say exactly what Neoplatonism is, as all of its thinkers interpreted it a bit differently. In fact, the word Neoplatonism is often used as a word for the group of people who share these ideas rather than the ideas themselves. One common theme, however, is the idea that all of reality derives from a concept called the One, or the Supreme One, which is not a living thing or being, but rather an idea or principle. Hypatia herself said that Neoplatonism is a progressive philosophy and does not expect to state final conditions to men whose minds are finite. Life is an unfoldment, and the further we travel, the more truth we can comprehend. To understand the things that are at our door is the best preparation for understanding those that lie beyond. Which basically means that Neoplatonism is very broad and could accommodate any number of actual truths. As was previously mentioned, Hypatia was a professor at the Neoplatonist School of Alexandria. She taught students from all over the Mediterranean and often walked through the city giving public lectures wearing one of these bad boys. She lectured on the works of Plato and Aristotle as well as on astronomy. Despite often teaching students from religions and backgrounds very different than her own, she was beloved by many. She herself never published any independent works of her own, but was responsible for editing and commenting on many famous texts, such as Ptolemy's Almagest, which was about the supposed geocentric solar system, and Apollonius of Perga's treatise on conic sections. She was also known to have created the first early astrolabes and hydrometers. So, the leader of Alexandria was the bishop. At the time, a new violent bishop named Cyril had recently taken power. Unlike his peaceful, beloved successor, Theophilus, Cyril was immediately disliked by Hypatia and her school. And being that Cyril was a Christian and Hypatia was a pagan, he greatly disliked her as well. The real conflict, however, started when Cyril made some very violent and anti-Semitic, or anti-Jewish orders. Orestes, a student of Hypatia's and the Roman prefect of Alexandria, openly spoke out against his actions. Much more violence occurred between these two leaders. Orestes was often advised by Hypatia as she wasn't really involved in the conflict. However, the fight eventually did reach her and she was murdered by a mob of Cyril's supporters. Her killing was by far one of the most violent and brutal in history, so believe it or not, I'm actually not going to go into detail there. So, what were some of the possible reasons for her murder? For one, there was a rumor flying around that Hypatia may have been preventing Orestes and Cyril from making up. But in actuality, she was the only one keeping them from tearing each other's heads off. And secondly, she was a woman, and despite the fact that it was pretty reasonable for women to be teachers at the time, the idea of her having such a role in politics just became too much to stand. Thirdly, Cyril and his supporters were Christian and did not like pagans. Therefore, her religion did play a big role in her murder. And lastly, she was Cyril's enemy's advisor, and as long as she wasn't actively fighting against Orestes, she was a problem. After her death, Hypatia became a martyr. She was used as a symbol both for and against Christianity, as well as for women's rights throughout history. And that's that on Hypatia. See you! Okay, so I've been editing for several hours now, and I just now realized that I've been pronouncing Neoplatonism wrong the entire time, so